you. So I got this comment the other day underneath the video. It was really great. It's like, what is happening actually inside my brain? What makes me good at being a dot connector or a pattern spotter? What makes me a multi-passionate person? If you understand this better, you can teach it, you can sell it, you can translate your value to other people. So I'm going to talk to you about what's happening in your brain and how to develop it in yourself and others. And it starts with these 3 types of thinking. The first thing that I've spotted in all the people I coach, I have over 700 hours of coaching, 5 years worth of practice. I think I've coached north of 50 people at this point who I would describe as generalists or multi-passionate people. They are really, really good at pattern recognition. They're fantastic at spotting familiar structures in new situations, and they draw on their lived experience. They draw on the things that they've learned through their life to essentially join the dots. So this pattern recognition is what makes you a good dot connector. It's what often makes you a multi-passionate person in general. The second trait that I've seen that multi-passionate people all share is an ability to do systems thinking. This is an ability to see loops, to see relationships, to see tensions, to see networks, rather than linear and cause and effect relationships. So a lot of people will see A causes B, which causes C, or A causes B and then C and D happen. They think in a linear way, whereas a lot of work that we do requires us to think in a more complex way. If you're dealing at all with people or social change or even communications and marketing, you'll understand that ideas don't spread in a linear way. They move through networks. They're slowed by gatekeepers. They're accelerated by people who are catalysts. If you're a systems thinker, you're able to map things like this in your head. You're able to understand how things might move through these systems, through these networks. And if you can translate that into thinking inside of an organization, it can make you very, very useful. The third type of thinking that I've spotted in all the multi-passionate people that I work with is abductive reasoning. This was a new term for me. I only learned it a couple of years ago. And this is the ability to form the best explanation from incomplete data. So it makes a lot of sense. You'll see this in a detective or an investigative journalist, but all multi-passionate people, all curious generalists possess this power to quite a high degree, I believe. They are able to take incomplete information. They're able to take partial bits of data and reason that up into a much bigger picture. So the incomplete turns complete, the confusion moves into clarity. That is incredibly powerful and is very different from logical reasoning. There might be certain people who are excellent at taking structural data and moving it on in a kind of logical way into its next progression, into the next idea. They often struggle when that data is incomplete. Multi-passionate people, curious generalists, are not like that. They have pattern recognition, they have systems thinking, they have abductive reasoning, and those 3 things together are essentially what is happening in your brain that makes you the kind of person that's hardwired for learning, the person who's really good at creative problem solving, the person who gets frustrated and bored when you're only working on one thing. It might make you a person who finds it really hard to focus either in the day-to-day or in your career. I've definitely felt that myself. However, it's only just one part of the battle, is kind of knowing the psychology, let's say, behind what's actually happening in your brain. But what's really key is trying to develop it yourself, obviously, to try and get better at these skills, to make yourself a better generalist, a better multi-potentialite or multi-passionate person. And then, of course, you want to try and teach it to others. If you're working in a team, or if you yourself want to be a coach, or if you want to support others in your life, not necessarily in a professional context, it's really great to be able to develop these skills in other people. So first you've got to recognize it, then you've got to develop it. Before I tell you how to do this, if you could like and subscribe the video, there are more videos coming like this. I've done a bunch on the channel already. Subscriptions really help. I'm trying to get that number up a little bit before the end of the year. So yeah, please stick around and hopefully I'll have some more interesting stuff for you on the channel. So let's talk about how to develop your multi-passionate nature, your curious generalism in yourself, and how to optimize these particular skills that I've talked about, these particular psychological processes that are happening in your brain. One of the ways to do it is to understand, firstly, which of them you are particularly good at. Most of us have intuitively developed ways of doing this very quickly. We've developed shortcuts, ways of thinking, ways of cognitively processing that allow us to lean into these skills, but we just do it like intuition, and it seems like magic to other people. So what I suggest is you take a task where maybe something that's going to take you an hour, maybe half an hour, let's say, something in that time range. And as you're going through and trying to solve this problem, make sure you write down as you're doing it, journal as you go along, exactly what you're doing. Are you positioning bits of research alongside each other? How are you finding things that helps you understand this problem? Are you assembling the problem in a certain way? Are you taking notes in a certain way? When you think about it in your brain, are you trying to extract from one thing and move it to another? Are you comparing things? Are there certain specific ways, mental processes, models that you use to try and get to the end result? So I'll give you an example. A thing that I often find myself doing, but I hadn't even recognized that I do it, is I often reach out to other disciplines or spaces where this problem is being solved or being worked on. And then I try to port the solution and the ideas back over into the space that I'm working on. So a practical example is like I do a lot of work in the minute in the non-profit journalism space. And what I'll do is reach into climate activism or think about anti-poverty movements. Think about how they're solving specific problems, whether that's in society or in the organization itself. And I'll start comparing and contrasting and seeing what I can adapt and adopt from those models. This is something I just do almost intuitively. I find myself going online, researching, pulling in these ideas and extracting some of the best of them, and then like hypothesizing how they could benefit the space that I'm working in right now. That is something that I do intuitively, and I hadn't really realized until I worked out that that's how my brain works, that that's immediately what I reach for as a tool in my toolkit to try and solve problems. Once I knew that, I'm basically able to kind of teach other people. I can name these mental moves, and you might be able to do the same. It might be reframing, it might be contrasting, it might be mapping or connecting. Lots of people work in different ways, both in terms of how their brain works and the mental models, but also then the processes that they do it, whether they're doing it on paper or on the computer. Do they write this down? Do they sketch it out? Those are the core things that are going to allow you to understand, am I a pattern recognizer? Am I a systems thinker? Am I using abductive reasoning? Am I using some kind of combination of all three? And what processes and systems and mental models have I internalized that help me do that really quickly? Because once you do that, you can then help other people. And one of the ways that I find it's best to then start helping other people is to start with some of your own notes as you've been going along. You can start with this journal. You can start sharing your unfinished sketches. This will help other people understand exactly how you work. And then you can set up a basis for a kind of mentor relationship or a collaboration that will allow you to develop this in others. If you are a leader in a team, or if you're working alongside someone who is a generalist and you want to get the best out of them, one of the best things that you can do is give them a task and allow them to solve it on their own. It sounds very simple, but if you give them something that is very ambiguous and very muddy without actually necessarily much direction or scope, you will probably find they're really good at solving this. And in the process of doing this, they themselves are going to flex that muscle. They're going to flex one of those three types of thinking, and you will hopefully be able to spot that in them, help them reflect themselves on what they're doing, and then start to improve this. You'll often find as well that when you're co-designing and closely collaborating, if you are able to show your thinking as you're going along as a leader or a colleague or a co-worker, you will help develop that in someone else. This is particularly great if you're working with a young person or someone with less experience than you. Allowing them to shadow you and being really explicit about what you're doing from a mental model and process perspective will allow them to understand this and adapt it for themselves. They may not be exactly the same as you, but just this process of being reflective about how you work, that will allow you to understand what your value is and the value to the organization. And this is super important because specialists often get all the credit in organizations. They're often rewarded with prizes and job roles and titles and all this kind of stuff. For generalists, that's not always the case. For multi-passionate people, we often feel unrecognized in organizations, but part of that problem is not spotting our own talents and not being able to develop our own talents in a way that makes sense. We're often pushed into paths of professional development that are trying to niche down, that are trying to specialize. And actually what we need to do is be able to flex those muscles of creative thinking, pattern recognition, etc., to move forward and improve ourselves and then hopefully improve the teams that we work with. Big part of this then is creating the enabling environment where this type of work is rewarded. So if you're a leader, obviously you need to recognize multi-potential thinking. You need to recognize creative solutions, people who occupy bridge roles, and find ways to make sure that the organizations get recognized. There's a video elsewhere on this channel on that, so I won't go into that too much here. But broadly, you're trying to reward and recognize a clarity of reasoning, not necessarily the depth of the answer or the speed of the answer, but you're trying to show people that what you really appreciate is clarity and interesting thought. That will go a really long way. Fundamentally, then you're just trying to, if you want to reward generalists in your organization, if you want to reward multi-passionate people, it is about stop treating intuition as magic somehow. It's trying to move beyond this idea that there's a black box in my head, that I don't know how I work and therefore other people don't know how I work. You need to reveal the magic. You need to show your thinking as a form of leadership in a way. And that can be done very practically by sharing your sketches, sharing your thought processes. But you yourself as a leader need to get to know yourself. You need to make your own thinking process, your own invisible skills visible so that others can learn from you, think with you, and help improve the organization or work on that project, creatively solve that problem. So there you go. Those are the 3 types of thinking that I've spotted in multi-passionate people. A little bit on how to recognize and develop those skills in yourself, and then how to also transfer those skills or encourage those skills in other people in the organization. Thanks so much for being here. Like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. I've got more of this coming. I'll see you again in the next video.